Hey, and welcome to our webinar, Rethinking the RFP, Finding the Perfect Fit, where we will discuss our recent survey regarding the RFP process, and we will offer expert advice on how to get the right ESP with your next RFP. For the survey, we talked to 100 marketing and tech professionals at large companies who had been involved in an RFP for a new ESP within the last 5 years. We asked them 18 questions regarding their views on ESPs and the RFP process. And we found that in many ways, the RFP isn't exactly getting the job done. Today, we'd like to discuss how companies can rethink this process in 2019. What are the right questions to ask up front? How can you make sure it works for you? We wanted to give the ESP and tech perspective along with the consultant perspective in order to give a broad insight into the research and its relevance to today's marketer. We have two perspectives here. We have Roger Barnett, the CEO of MessageGears, and we have Chris Marriott, the president of Marketing Democracy. They will help us talk through the survey and the results and give you some advice on how to move forward from there. Hey guys, thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
My pleasure. Good morning.
So I think right off, we'd like to jump in. When you're considering a new RFP, we heard from a lot of people on what factors indicate to you it may be a time to switch ESPs. What leads them into doing the RFP in the first place? Chris, when you look at the results we can see on the screen here, do these line up with what you typically see?
Absolutely, Jeff. I think one of the biggest drivers of an RFP, and again, nobody enters into an RFP without a lot of thought. Marketers, because marketers tend to recognize it's a lot of work, and migration is also a lot of work. And it really takes something other than just, we've been with them for 5 years or with them for 3 years. But what we see is it really is, the most important factors are first, and your research bears it out, that there's a perception that functionality may have fallen behind other platforms. So oftentimes they're going out, not necessarily because they're extremely unhappy with their existing partner, but rather they're not sure if it continues to be the right partner. And after all, the RFP process is designed to find that right partner. Sometimes there is also just the relationship will break down over time. Relationships break down, business relationships, personal relationships, and we often see that as well. The perception I can get a better deal elsewhere. CPMs have come down so much in the last 10 years, 5 years, that while that's still often a driver of I want to do an RFP, it's much less often a driver of who's going to win the RFP. But we'll probably get to that later.
Chris, thanks for your perspective. And I'll start with your last comment and just concur that, for the enterprise marketers, and I should start out by saying MessageGears really only sells and services like the largest senders. We call them the super senders. And, certainly in that category of customers and prospects, price is important, but not the most important. The email is such an invaluable channel for them to communicate and retain and upsell to their customers that getting the right fit is the most important thing. And then once you find the right fit, I think then price becomes important after that. And so I think we both see the same things out there. I look at this and again, I'm not surprised. I mean, the first one says the functionality is falling behind other platforms. I think the legacy marketing clouds in the space just frankly haven't been innovating in email. And I think that's why you see a whole slew of new technologies, that have arisen that are really great and customer centric and modern, user interfaces and user experiences that serve the needs that perhaps some of the SaaS products that were developed 10 or 15 years ago and have been acquired have perhaps fallen behind. And so, I think the functionality is important, and because of, these big monolithic companies and and there's been consolidation and acquisitions in this space. We hear service a lot. Where you mentioned it's generally painful for companies to switch ESPs, and the technology might be okay or doing good enough, but when they can't get somebody on the phone to help them with an issue, that is like the straw that breaks the camel's back in lots of cases as well. So I think this is a pretty good list and reflects what we see out in the market, certainly.
Well, good. Yeah, and so, moving forward, we see a lot in the survey of people trying to do the best they can with these RFPs, but it doesn't end up working in a lot of cases. A lot of companies, they went to an RFP and had a preferred vendor in mind from the start. They went into that process thinking, this is who we're going to select. The research showed that over half of marketers entered that process with that being the case. Roger, from your experience, what have been the dangers of that approach for the company?
Well, I can tell you as a challenger brand, Message Gears is just not, we don't have the longevity or the exposure that somebody like Adobe or Oracle or Salesforce would have. This is challenging for us, but ultimately, I think for potential purchasers, this is dangerous because the brands that are best known in this industry are ones that, again, typically aren't innovating as much, where email is part of 50 or 100 different products they sell versus email being the core of what they do, and they wake up every morning thinking about innovating in the email channel, or certainly the messaging channel. So I see this a good bit. We're out there fighting the good fight every day, but there's lots of RFPs where I see companies that we would be a perfect fit for that just didn't know about us and we weren't included in the RFP. So I think it's a little dangerous for the vendor to live in their bubble. I mean, Chris, you see this from the opposite side. I'd love to hear your opinion on this and if this mimics what you see.
Yeah, it's interesting. And we've designed. I should have said up front, we work entirely with enterprise email marketers. So as Roger said, that he's high volume, they're a high volume platform. All of our clients are high volume. So that's the perspective from which I come. It's okay to start as an individual with a preferred vendor. We can't eliminate our own personal biases entirely. There are people we've worked with in the past. There are people that we know at vendors potentially. And so, sit here and say, it's absolutely doomed to start with a preferred vendor as an individual. Again, it's unrealistic. The point is, though, that you can't allow any incoming preferences to change your process and your decision making. And by that, I mean that you have to allow the top ESP in your process to come to the top, and it may not be your preferred vendor, and you have to be ready to deal with that. We use a scorecard-driven methodology when we're working with our clients, and that's designed really to flatten out any biases of our clients, individuals that are clients. So we just did working on an RFP where there were 14 people at the client who were involved in the decision process, each of whom were filling out scorecards at each stage of the process. And what that does is when you have 14 people filling out the scorecards, one person's bias gets sort of washed out in the results. And what you get is a better perspective from that company wide rather than individual. And so, one of the ways that if you were thinking of an RFP and you want to make sure that you consider all of your options is to involve as many people in your organization as possible so that your personal bias doesn't mean you stay with the wrong vendor or pick the wrong vendor.
Chris, I mean, looking at this next slide, talking about the initial list of ESPs to include, what are the things that helped you come up with that list to include in the RFP? Again, I'd love your opinion on this. I mean, but from my perspective, with internal knowledge and professional network being 1 and 2 here, I think that's a little dangerous because what happens is you're in your own bubble, right? And as I work for a brand, you know what you know about your brand and who you've personally worked with in the past and who your friends in the industry have worked with in the past. which is often the same cast of characters. And I think part of what an RFP could do is introduce you to different alternatives. And we've seen, more modern platforms. Certainly, we would qualify for that on the enterprise side, and but there's great platforms like, Braised and comes to mind, and Iterable for the mid-market. The smaller senders, that are great platforms, modern platforms, solve needs in ways that legacy players don't. But if you haven't happened to work with one of those in the past, you might not think to include them, unless you perhaps broaden the way you expand your list, or use a consulting firm like yourself to do that. I mean, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Roger. I think the fastest way to ensure your RFP is not going to have a great outcome is to not develop a good list of ESPs to include. And ways to not develop a good list, Roger, you're exactly right. I always say professional network, and we see that all the time, where people on some of the email lists will post, what does somebody think of, who's working with XYZ vendor, and what do they think of them? My attitude is, if you ask somebody, if they like a particular vendor and if that would be good for you, you're going to end up with a vendor that's right for the person you asked, not necessarily for you. Every vendor, every email marketer has distinct and unique requirements, and so people who are, other people that in your network are using the platform, their requirements are different. So that what is a good platform for them isn't a good platform for you. Another mistake that we see is overly relying on some of the buyer's guides, particularly the buyer's guides that, I'm going to say it. I mean, I'm tired of having the Forrester wave drop down and say, well, here's the vendors, because how Forrester arrives at their list is Forrester's opinion, and there are things that go into that again may have zero relevance to what you're doing. What you need to do is really take a look at it, and as Roger said, you need to look at the market, think about your own requirements, and again, if you can hire somebody like a marketing democracy or someone else who can come in and help you work through, who are the right vendors for you, for your unique requirements, you're going to get off on the right foot. And we always include and advise our clients to include somebody who you may not have thought of, like a Message Gears, who may not immediately think, well, their model is different, their approach is different, and the worst thing you can do is too early in the process say that model doesn't fit my needs. You want to keep an open mind going in, and you want to make sure again that you're including the right one. Oftentimes we'll get called in the middle of an RFP when a client hits a brick wall and doesn't know how to proceed, and we look at who they've whittled it down to, and they're not even the differences between the ESPs are looking at, of course, make it impossible for them to decide, because they may have incredibly different business models, incredibly different sizes, and so you're not even comparing apples to apples for your needs.
Yeah, great. So moving on to the next topic, we want to look at how much time people expect an RFP to take. What do they expect when they go into the process? And we found that they're hesitant to switch in for one reason, is that it's going to take a long time and the pain just doesn't seem worth it. We found in this survey that people expect the RFP process itself to take 6 to 12 months. And then the implementation of the vendor they're going to select after that to take another 6 to 12 months. So you're looking at 1 year at least, all the way up to 2 years to go from where you are to where you want to be. Roger, from your experience, do you find that that's a realistic expectation?
Certainly, with the existing crop of legacy platforms, absolutely. We see, the RFP process for a lot of the super senders that we work with is their own process, and there's not much as on the vendor side we can do about that, except provide everything they need in as timely a manner as possible. But it generally is a multi-departmental decision, that just takes a little bit of time. The ESP migration piece of this is interesting, where, geez, look at that, over 50% takes more than 6 months to migrate. It looks like 39 plus 22 plus 4, which is 65%, take 6 to 18 months plus to migrate platforms after they've made a 6 to 12 month RFP decision, which sounds ludicrous. And you could understand why a lot of people just throw their hands up and say, it's just not worth it. I don't even know if I'm going to be at this company in 2 years, for me to start this process now. What I look at when I look at the migration side is, I think people look at, again, they look at status quo. And yes, for the marketing cloud platforms, it does take, for the big enterprises, it takes 6 to 12 months to migrate. Not meant to be a sales pitch, but for MessageGears, it takes, 6 to 9 days to migrate, not 6 to 9 months. And like, I would love to see that being a bigger part of the RFP. We don't see migration questions on the RFP because I think people just assume this is status quo, this is how everything works. People often decide not to switch because of the migration time, where if they're on iPlatform, they can get email campaigns going in a matter of days, or at least get the IP warm-up process starting on very specific targeted campaigns with dynamic content. That's just impossible with these other platforms that require data mapping and data syncing. So yeah, I think this rings very true, and I can understand from the marketer perspective why it's very daunting. And I'd love to see the migration piece play a heavier role in the RFP process.
Yeah, that's a great point, Roger. And somebody who manages the RFP process and puts requirements and documents together, point taken. But back to the original question from Jeff, this was encouraging to see because these are very, based on our experience, very, very realistic numbers as well. We will typically tell a client that we begin working with, tell us how long you think the RFP will take, and then double it, because we found that they always tend to take longer than somebody expects when they start. And so they are done right. They're a very involved process, and migrating with all the steps that Roger was referring to when you're migrating from one legacy system to another. It takes an enormous amount of time. So it is not something that you want to enter into lightly. Again, which brings us back to the point that if you're going to do an RFP and it's going to take this long, and depending who you pick, that you're going to potentially have, you might have a 9-day migration, but you also might have a 9-month migration. You want to absolutely make sure that you are making the right decision before you commit the time to that, because the worst thing you can do is spend all this time and make the wrong decision. And frankly, we've seen people make that not that we've worked with, but we've seen other clients in the space or marketers make a wrong decision. And once you're done this, that's a bad decision you're going to live with for 3 or 4 years. And nobody wants to face that.
I couldn't agree with that more. And more than one time on our side, we've had companies proactively reach out to us in the middle of an RFP process where they've made bad decisions about who should be involved, and they're looking at, now they're at a point where they're looking at a series of finalists, maybe even doing proof of concepts with 2 or 3. In fact, our largest client was in the middle of a proof of concept stage of an RFP, and they reached out to us because they're like, it's just not working. All the issues we have with our current vendor, we have with these other vendors, and because it's a fundamental thing about the way the ESPs work. MessageGears, can you help us out? And that's been a great multi-year relationship now, and they're a very large client. So again, it's just, I couldn't agree more, tantamount to get the right list together and ask the right questions and take the process seriously. But also get started sooner than later. The longer you put it off, the longer it's going to take to get a new system up and going.
Yeah, Roger, I should have added that as well. I mean, particularly if you're a retailer, you need to understand when you need to be up for the holiday season and back it from there. And again, if you're looking at these numbers, just as an example, if you're thinking, RFP this year and be migrated to a new platform in time for the holiday season, that would be a very daunting thing to do if you started today. Not impossible, but again, you need to back into when you should start your RFP process, so that your decision isn't driven by, 1, when your contract expires, because that's a horrible situation to be in, or 2, when you need to lock down your systems for the holiday season. Don't let those things force you into a bad decision.
Yeah, and there are a lot of pitfalls that you can run into. In addition to some of the things you mentioned, one of the things we found in the survey was that 60% of marketers said they revised less than half of the contents of the previous RFP when going into a new one. Chris, obviously you run a lot of RFPs. We want to get your input on that. What kind of problems can that cause for a company as they go into RFP if they're not going back and kind of going back to the drawing board and making sure they make it up to date to what they need right now?
Yeah, this is the other thing that can derail an RFP from the start. So the list of ESPs you include can derail it if you include the wrong mix and your RFP or requirement documents, because I think of them in many ways the same thing. If it's particularly bad strategy if you're doing the RFP because you feel like your platform has fallen behind others, to go back and recycle part of your previous RFP or most of your previous RFP. I like to say that if you're using the requirements from your last RFP 3 years ago, you're going to select the ESP that was perfect for you 3 years ago. And so it is critical that, and again, there are certain things that don't change over time. I'm not suggesting that anybody has to create an RFP 100% new from the ground up or requirements 100% new from the ground up. But again, if you are really trying to future-proof your decision and pick a platform that really is, ahead of the curve or ahead of your immediate needs, but you can grow into it, then you've got to spend the time building the requirements and really thinking about not just what's important to you now, because there's always things that you don't know when it comes to these marketing technologies, and you got to find people who do know what you don't know, whether it's ESPs that aren't necessarily on your come to mind immediately, but that you talk to when you're looking at who to involve, or again hiring an outside party to help you develop those requirements, who is not an order taker. We always tell our clients, we're not order takers. We're not doing you any good if we simply come in and say, what would you like in a platform? We're challenging them constantly about, did you think about this? Did you think about that? What would it be like if you could do this? And those, again, are all critical things that you do up front in order to ensure that you're going to find the ESP that is most well suited for your unique requirements. And I say that in that if there was a best ESP, there'd only be one ESP. Everybody would pick it. There is not a best ESP, but there's a best ESP for you. And you got to make sure that your requirements are crafted in a way that you're asking the right questions, and that your list of ESPs that you invite are those that can most likely can reflect those requirements or deliver on those requirements.
Oh yeah, I mean, I
move my arms when I get passionate.
I completely agree about there's a right ESP for everyone, and that's not the same ESP for everyone. And I look at this and certainly get frustrated. This data. I mean, I think if you're using most of your RFP from the last time you did an RFP, which was likely 5 years ago or more, you're going to be looking for technology that was best suited for your needs 5 years ago. I mean, that's just the easiest way to think of it. And as all the brand marketers, that are listening and watching right now, I mean, think about how different your needs are today than they were 5 years ago around data security and privacy and your ability to use that outside your firewall, around personalization and the expectations of your customers to receive personalized email on every message communication instead of batch and blast. Think about dynamic content and targeting and all the things, and cross-channel messaging, where it was just email 5 or 10 years ago. Now it's email combined in coordination with push and SMS and others. So if you're writing an RFP based on your needs 5 years ago, then you're going to get a software that was good for you 5 years ago and not good for you. So you don't need to rewrite it from the ground up, but you need to think through your needs from the ground up and then see how your RFP fits that.
If you just look at the changes you've made in your own program in the last 5 years, that should give you some idea of how far you've come and how much your requirements have grown and changed in that period of time.
Yeah, and so all of these challenges and some of the little mistakes and the pitfalls that people have, we were curious how they make people view the ESP. We definitely hear out there that there are a lot of people who think that is there really a lot of difference between ESPs? We see that they look like they're all doing the same thing. And when we ask the question of having them say whether they how strongly they agree with the statement of all ESPs are basically the same, the results I think were pretty eye-opening, and we found that a pretty decent chunk of them and a majority of them agreed with it pretty strongly, and some of them very, very strongly. Roger, from your experience being out there and talking to people and being in these RFPs and getting out there, did it surprise you that people felt as strongly about that statement as they did, according to the survey?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. So, short answer, it doesn't surprise me at all. And unfortunately, I don't agree with it though. And so I think that's part of the challenge that all ESPs have is separating themselves from the clutter. But in doing so, they create so much clutter that marketers look at it as just kind of noise. The reality is most ESPs do things the same way, though. If I think of the legacy marketing cloud platforms, there's 4 or 5 of them on the enterprise supercenter side that are the usual suspects. They're 80 to 90% similar across the board in terms of both how they do things and features and functionality. And so when you pick the right one for you as a marketer, it's really picking the one that is better for you on the margins. They have more retail experience and maybe they're a little better for retailers, or this one has better services than the other one, and we really need to be more service heavy than self-service heavy, or this one there might be some intangible reasons for, but they are mostly the same. I would say it's the more modern, newer, more technically advanced platforms like MessageGears that are fundamentally different in terms of our approach to solving the problem, and then in turn the power that gives our clients to be able to deliver incredibly personalized messages at scale in real time. We just do it in a different way, which makes us for a certain set of clients better. Just like Chris says, we're not best for all clients, but for a certain set of clients we're better. And so not all ESPs are the same, and so this is why I think a rigorous and well thought out process will help brands identify the right ESP for them.
Yeah, if you think that all ESPs are the same, and if that's a conclusion you're coming to in your RFP process, the fault is yours, not the ESPs. And by that, I mean you're not asking the right questions or asking the questions in the right way. Again, anecdotally, I mean, we often get called into a RFP process where the requirements document's gone out, it's come back, and I will say, well, apparently everybody can do everything. And while that's not true, again, if you ask the questions or list the requirements in a way that everybody can say, yes, we can do that, yes, we can do that, you're going to get the result that everybody can do everything. It really comes down to not just asking if they can do something in particular, but how they do it. And that's, again, MessageGears is a great example of somebody who may do something very, very, very differently than another ESP. And if you don't dig deep enough to find out that not just can they do it, but they can do it differently, and you might determine better, then only when you dig deeper into the requirements and get information, is a functionality native in the platform? Is it through a third party? Is there a single logon that I have to do it? I mean, all of these things begin to separate the ESPs. The more you ask, the better questions you ask, and again, the deeper you go in the process. They are not all the same. And as Roger said, there are some new ESPs, Gears being one of them, that have a very different model than the traditional legacy ESPs, all of whom, again, are very strong and right for lots of clients in their own right. But if you can't make, if you're sitting in your RFP and saying, I can't tell them apart, then the problem is how you got to that point and what you've been asking and how you've been asking it. It's not the ESPs. They're going to all tell you. Salespeople are always they're never going to tell you no. no matter what you ask them, they're never going to tell you, no, we can't do that. So you need to dig deep enough to find out what they can really do and how they actually do it.
Yeah, and so going into, okay, if people at this point are kind of thinking, okay, I recognize there's some challenges with the RFP process, but a lot of people do find value in it, but only a little over a third in our survey said they found it very valuable. We'll start with Chris, but I'd be curious, both your thoughts. What advice would you have for a team that's had limited success with RFPs in the past and wants to try to do better in the future?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, again, I mean, I sound a bit like a broken record in that, if an RFP is done correctly and you take the time and effort in inviting the right ESPs and developing a good set of unique requirements and use cases, you can't help but find it a valuable process. So if you found it not valuable in the past, you need to look at what you did and see how you can do things differently. If you read the white paper that MessageGears posted, I tell a story at the beginning of it, not a story on a sidebar, but which I think is really valid, and you need to be thinking about that. And there it's, say you were taking a trip to Europe and you were going from New York to Paris. There's more than one type of transportation you could take, but the way many RFPs are run is if you were making creating an RFP for how you're going to get there and you invited only airlines, now you're right out of the gate limiting what you're going to be asking about and how you're going to be differentiating them, and you're probably going to say, oh my gosh, all airlines are alike, and in many ways all airlines are alike. But if you said, I'm going to look at airlines, I'm going to look at cruise lines, I'm going to look at, I'm not sure what other options there are at the moment, but even if you just opened it up and say, maybe I want to go by boat, how would your requirements for that trip change from just only including airlines to including a cruise lines as well as airlines, and then things like a personal, amenities on the trip, are going to be more heavily weighted towards the cruise than the airline. It's the exact same thing when you're doing ESP RFP. You need to upfront open your mind and say, I'm gonna look at things from a broader canvas. I'm not going to presuppose that my data is going to sit here, that I'm not going to do that with my data, that I have to have all of this functionality that I'm not currently using, but I might use at some point in the future. You have to, again, stay as broad as possible, as long as possible. And again, I'm not now contradicting myself and saying compare apples to oranges, because you're not comparing apples to oranges if your requirements are clear and if everybody you include has the ability to meet those requirements on some level or another. Now your job is just to figure out who meets them the best. And that's what the process, if you do the process correctly, you will find it extraordinarily valuable. Extraordinarily valuable. Roger, you're on mute again.
That's my same advice. Maybe put slightly a different way. Going into the RFP process, focus on outcomes. Focus on what you want to accomplish, and let your RFP flow from that. So many RFPs we get are basically, they look and feel like Marketing Cloud RFPs, and they just a list of features and functions. Do you have these 75 things in the campaign management section? Yes or no? And you go line by line and look at each one. When the question you should be asking is, I have 25 million people in my database, and I need to send them personalized emails every day based on things that are happening in real time. Can I do that with your platform easily and inexpensively? And then all the questions should flow from that. And maybe not all 75 features are important. Instead of looking at the list of features and functions of the existing platforms, focus on what you need to accomplish and then how important those things are to accomplishing that goal. And I think if you do that, you'll end up in a good place.
Agreed.
Good. Thank you, guys. We had had a question come in from a viewer and wanted to get to this one. She wanted to know, can you talk more about the proof of concept idea as it pertains to RFPs? How does it work? And do you have any other tips for kind of setting up and negotiating one with a potential ESP candidate? Maybe, Chris, you could kind of lead off on that.
Sure. I'll speak from our experience and our process, because we find the proof of concept. We call it sandbox. When we get all of our RFPs, we have requirements, but we also develop unique use cases with our clients that are a foundation of that RFP process, and enable in meetings directly with them, rather than vendors showing what they want, showing solutions to your specific problem, and each vendor is addressing the same problems. When we get down to the final two, we have what we call a sandbox phase, where we'll invite each vendor to spend, come in for a week and run through those use cases, load some data in your production environment, and so our clients can get their hands into the platform, and they've been shown how it works, but now they're on their own trying to figure out if it works as well as it was shown, if it's as intuitive as it was, how quick is it. Because we found that where proofs of concept are really valuable, or sandboxes, or whatever you want to call it, is, we didn't talk about this earlier, but I've seen that as RFPs go on, the influence of the day-to-day people who are in the platform, at the marketer, the campaign production team, the email ops team, their influence goes up, and it should, because they're the ones who are going to be stuck with the decision, not the CMO or the VP of digital. It's going to be the email ops team. And so the last part of ours, whether, again, you call it proof of concept or whether you call it a sandbox phase, is getting the email operations people familiar with the platform, with the vendors there, showing them how to use it, coaching them during that week, and then those platforms, they'll make the decision between those two platforms head to head on various features and functionality and things that they do on a day-to-day basis. So again, extremely valuable. If you're a huge brand, the vendors will do it, and getting them to do it is not going to be an issue. They want your business. If you're a mid-market brand, it may be less easy to get them to go jump through those types of hoops, but you never know. And asking's for free.
Yeah, we love proof of concepts, and clients that want to do them. I think every client should want to do a proof of concept before you make an enterprise software decision, period. And we love doing it for our clients. I think most of the other vendors kind of push off because it's very expensive for them, and proof of concepts are really more like sandbox environments for other vendors, where you kind of upload a small sample of your data and then you get your hands on it. The way MessageGears works is we basically install our software. Because we're so easy to implement, we install our software on your live data, and it takes like an afternoon, and we do some training and say, give us your hardest program, let's set it up right now. And that's our proof of concept is it's not live bullets. We'll send email out to a black hole. We won't do IP warm-ups and things like that. But in terms of you having access to our entire system on your live data sets, that's what our proof of concept is. And about negotiations, we do ours for free. Our proof of concepts are so compelling, and they're so, frankly, relatively straightforward to set up, that we don't need to have a contract. How we generally handle it is, if we have an NDA in place and we feel like we're operating in good faith, we'll come out, we'll install it, we'll train you, we'll set up a tough program, and leave you to your own devices. And that's how we, Expedia decided to go with us, because they were amazed that there are other vendors, they couldn't even get launched in a 90-day POC, and we were sending out emails in day 2. Ebates, Chick-fil-A, IT department, it's like, guys, you don't understand, the software is ready to go, it's already loaded and launched. So our proof of concepts are different, but because of that, they're important for us. But I would just say, at a high level, we absolutely agree that it should be required before you make a decision, whether you're in an RFP or not, if you're just talking to different vendors.
Well, great. Well, for those of you out there, research is available on our website. You can dig in and see the whole thing if you're interested in learning more about what we found. Everyone who RSVP'd for the live webinar will get a copy emailed to them automatically, along with a follow-up survey next week. And just a brief note on MessageGears, we are the cross-channel messaging platform for super senders. If you're a large data-centric brand that needs to keep up with today's ever-changing technology and consumer demands, MessageGears was built for you. Our cross-channel messaging platform lives where your data lives, giving you unlimited potential for creating and sending highly personalized, relevant campaigns. We saw the most expect ESP migration to take a long time, and we've solved for that as well, cutting onboarding times in half and saving you time and money in the long run. Reach out to us about starting your own proof of concept today. We'd love to take your toughest program and show you how Message Gear can make it happen. Thank you for attending, and we appreciate your input, Roger and Chris. Thank you guys for coming on and sharing your valuable insight.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Enjoyed it. Thank you.